Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on the National Science Foundation's Improving Undergraduate STEM Education and Human Resources program. My name is Ellen Carpenter. I'm from the National Science Foundation, where I serve as a program director in the Division of Undergraduate Education, and I, along with my colleague Keith Sverdrup, will be hosting today's webinar. Keith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Ellen. I'm Keith Sverdrup, and as Ellen mentioned, I'm one of her colleagues also working on the IUSE program in the Division of Undergraduate Education.
Today's webinar is going to focus specifically on Levels 1 and the capacity building submissions in the IUSE program. And this is for proposals that were submitted or will be submitted in response to program solicitation NSF 19-601. By way of information, today's session is being recorded, and you will have access to a recording of the webinar if you would like to revisit it through the AAAS toolkit that is available to you on the AAAS website. The web address is AAAS-IUSE.org. The resources on that website will include copies of the slides that we're using in the presentation today, a copy of the program solicitation, and a survey for you to take at the end of today's presentation. In addition, by participating in today's session, you are giving us permission to record your questions and your comments. So the first question I'd like to ask is what all of you would like to do. Are you interested in improving students' performance and retention in STEM courses and majors at your institutions? Are you interested in increasing participation of women and students from underrepresented groups in both STEM courses and STEM majors? Do you want to help prepare students to enter the STEM workforce? How about increasing faculty engagement with STEM teaching? Or making your institution a better place for STEM teaching and learning? Well, I think you're in the right place, and I hope you'll stay tuned to learn more about the IUSE program as we go through the webinar today. We're going to do a few things today. We'll start with a brief introduction to the program itself and give you an idea as to what the program is about. I'll give you just a minute to maybe brainstorm a few ideas of your own, to think about what you might like to do, and to hold that as a thought that you can use to guide you as you listen to the rest of the webinar. We'll talk about the program organization, and that will include a brief description of the different tracks and levels that are available within the program, as well as workshop and conference submissions. We'll go into some information about expectations of the program, what the program is looking for in proposals that are received to this program, as well as the review criteria that will be used to examine the different proposals. We'll provide you with some resources that will be available to you through the National Science Foundation or through AAAS. And at the very end of the webinar, we have a set of slides that are just for those who are new to the proposal preparation and submission process. So if you'd like to hang around at the end of the webinar, if we have time, we'll go through those slides. I would like to note, if we don't manage to go through those slides today, we have covered them in several other webinars, and those webinars are archived on the AAAS website. So as a brief introduction to the IUSE program, who are we? Well, we hope to do a couple different things. We really would like to improve the quality and effectiveness of the education of undergraduates in all STEM fields. This is not specifically for STEM majors, but for any undergraduate who is participating in STEM coursework and STEM education at an undergraduate institution. So that would be a 2-year or 4-year institution of higher education. We also hope to improve undergraduate STEM teaching and learning for all students or the institutional environment where they occur, so actually working on the institution itself. Proposals are accepted from all types of institutions of higher education, as well as from professional societies and organizations that relate to the education of undergraduate students. We have funded, over the years of our existence, a number of different types of institutions. And so this graph gives you an idea of the types of institutions that we've funded and the degrees that they grant. The largest percentage of our funding goes to public institutions, but with substantial fractions also to private institutions nonprofit foundations, and a very small amount to business and industry, for example, those industries related to educational technology. The widest representation among institutions that receive funding through the IUSE program are those that grant many degrees up to and including the doctoral degree. Some institutions only grant as far as the master's degree, others bachelor's degree, or are ending at the associate's degree, and that is primarily community colleges. In addition, some of our funding goes to non-degree granting institutions, and that would include things like professional societies and, again, educational technology industries. So my question for you right now is to think about what you would like to do. So I'm going to give you just a minute to brainstorm some of your ideas. I really want you to think about what you've been longing to do to improve undergraduate STEM education. So grab a piece of paper or open a screen on your computer, and I'm going to ask you to write down 3 things that you might have been wanting to do to improve STEM teaching or learning. For those of you who are already in the process of preparing a proposal, this might be a good time to pull up your proposal and maybe go through the project summary very briefly so you can think about the emphasis of the proposal that you've been preparing. When you've done that, I'm going to ask you to look at the ideas and pick the most compelling one to you. And then to think about what it would take to actually implement this idea. Presumably it's going to take some money, otherwise you wouldn't be applying to the IUSE program. But what else might you need? Are you going to need people? Are you going to need institutional resources, collaborators from another institution? Think about all those different types of things. And then I want you to keep your idea in mind as a potential target for an IUSE proposal. If you would like to let us know what some of your ideas are very briefly, you can use the chat box to state your ideas, or the Q&A box. And I'm going to give you about a minute and a half to sort of think this through, and I'll pick you up on the other side of that minute and a half. Ready? Go. Okay, so I've gotten a couple of ideas have come up in the question and answer box. But again, keep those ideas in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. So the IUSE program itself is organized into 2 main tracks. These are the Engaged Student Learning track and the Institutional and Community Transformation track. And within each of those tracks, we have a number of different levels and different types of funding that are available, as well as deadlines that apply differentially to the different levels. And so we'll go through all of that in the next few slides here. So the 2 tracks, as I mentioned, are Engaged Student Learning and Institutional and Community Transformation. So the Engaged Student Learning track really focuses on the student, and it's interested in the development, testing, and use of teaching practices and curricular innovations that can help to engage students and improve their learning, persistence, and retention in STEM. That doesn't necessarily mean that all projects in this track need to focus directly on the students, but they could certainly work on the students through something like faculty professional development, that the ultimate input or ultimate outcome will be to affect student learning. The Institutional and Community Transformation track is a little bit more of a bird's eye track, and this track seeks for transformation of colleges and universities to help them implement and sustain highly effective STEM teaching and learning. And so this tends to be at a little bit broader level than the level of the student. And it really is working on, departments, institutions, or communities of institutions as a collaborative group. As I mentioned, within these two tracks, we have a number of levels. And as a reminder, of course, Engaged Student Learning focuses on increasing engagement and learning through new tools, resources, and models, and hopes to generate knowledge about how students learn. Within this track, there are three levels. Level 1 features proposals that request amounts up to $300,000 for a duration of up to 3 years. Level 2 would be $300,000 to $600,000 for up to 3 years. And level 3 would be $600,000 to $2 million for a term of up to 5 years. This webinar was planned in advance of the February 2nd, 2021 deadline, which will be a deadline for level 1 proposals within the Engaged Student Learning track. Level 2 and level 3 proposals will also be accepted in 2021, but not until December. So you have a little bit of time to think about a project if you're interested in working on that scale. Within the Institutional and Community Transformation track, we again are interested in spreading and scaling up evidence-based practices using a theory of change to guide the work that's in the proposals. And we'll talk about what a theory of change is a little bit in more detail in a few slides. We're also hoping that proposals in this particular track can help to generate knowledge about the organizational change process. There are 3 different ways to apply to the Institutional and Community Transformation track. We have proposals at level 1 and level 2. Level 1 would be the same as Engaged Student Learning, so that would be up to $300,000 for up to 3 years, whereas level 2 in the Institutional and Community Transformation track are proposals that range from $300,000 to $2 million for a single institution, or up to $3 million for a collaborative proposal from multiple institutions for a term of up to 5 years. We also have a level an avenue within this particular track called capacity building. Capacity building is really designed as an entry point into this particular track. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the capacity building proposals might look like in a few slides. But capacity building proposals can request up to $150,000 for a single institution or up to $300,000 for multiple institutions for a term of up to 2 years. So as I mentioned, the Engaged Student Learning track really focuses on improving student learning. And this can either be a direct impact on the students through some sort of educational intervention, like an intuitive tutor or a virtual tutoring system, or more indirectly through things like faculty professional development, faculty training, or adopting curricular reforms to help student learning. This track also supports development of improved instructional materials or methods that will impinge directly on the students and aims to engage the students to improve their learning and ultimately to increase retention and performance in STEM. A number of different approaches might be appropriate for this track, and this is a list of just a few. So these are some suggestions, but this is certainly not not meant to be any sort of limitation on the types of proposals that are entertained in this track. These types of approaches might include the development and implementation of novel instructional materials and technologies, again, thinking about virtual tutoring systems or something along that line. These might include the design and assessment of metrics to help measure STEM teaching and learning, or to better define student outcomes, so understanding how things are actually affecting the students. The track might also support projects that work on faculty learning through professional development or development of evidence-based practices in faculty groups. The track can support discipline-based or interdisciplinary educational research, again with the student as a focus, re-envisioning or adaptation of learning environments to better serve the students, and co-curricular activities that might help to increase student motivation and persistence in STEM. Some of the proposals supported by this track are synthesis proposals or feature meta-analysis of prior work to help discover perhaps the best method of approaching some of the questions, and collaborations between 2-year and 4-year institutions to help develop innovative pathways for transfer and student success are always welcome in the track. The target population for projects that are supported by this particular track are undergraduate students at 2-year and 4-year institutions of higher education. These students can be STEM majors, either declared majors, which typically would be more senior students, or undeclared majors, those just beginning their educational trajectory through these 2-year and 4-year institutions. Targeted students can also be those whose course of study requires solid knowledge and skills in STEM principles, or solid skills and knowledge of STEM principles. This can certainly be major students, or it can also be non-major students. We're interested in supporting work with non-STEM majors that are seeking to fulfill a general education requirement in STEM, again, to improve their STEM learning regardless of their major. Additional targets might be STEM faculty members to help them develop or innovate educational interventions that can help their students. And an additional category that is of interest to us are pre-service STEM teachers who are enrolled in undergraduate teacher preparation programs. One feature that we have right now in effect is we actually have a Dear Colleague letter that relates to this particular track. So the Dear Colleague letter can be found under NSF 20-034. And this Dear Colleague letter encourages the submission of proposals from institutions that have not had prior support from the IUSE program. So projects that could potentially meet the goals of this particular Dear Colleague letter can help to contribute to developing the STEM and STEM-related workforce, to advancing a disciplinary STEM field, to broadening participation in STEM or educating a STEM literate public, to helping improve K-12 STEM education through the preparation of pre-service teachers, encouraging lifelong learning, or building STEM capacity in higher education. Again, these would be projects that would be supported by institutions that have not had prior IUSE funding, so they would be new to the program. And all of the projects are expected to increase knowledge about effective STEM education through posing and answering a set of knowledge-generating questions. If your institution or if you are interested in responding to this Dear Colleague letter, we ask that you please begin your proposal title with New to IUSE EHR DCL. That allows us to select out those proposals that meet the Dear Colleague letter challenge and to review them as a group. The institutional and community transformation track focuses more on improving evidence-based instruction by departments, institutions, and other organizations or communities, typically larger groups than perhaps a single classroom of students. This track supports efforts to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate education and to try to figure out what the features are that can help institutions change to better support STEM teaching and learning. One of the ways in which proposals and awards in this particular track try to do this is through applying appropriate theories of change that can be used to help transform an institution. I would like to point out that we recently hosted a webinar that specifically looks at this track of proposals, the institutional and community transformation track. So the webinar was held on the 10th of November in 2020, and the webinar has been archived on the AAAS website. So if you're interested in this particular track and you haven't received enough information from today's webinar, please know that there are other resources for you that are available on the AAAS website. Institutional and community transformation projects can take a variety of shapes, and they might include approaches such as transforming high enrollment classes to include evidence-based teaching practices. They can look at things like developing evaluation rubrics that are rooted in some sort of research-based framework to help better understand what is actually happening in the classroom and in the institution. Projects in this track can contribute to the development of faculty communities to help improve accessibility or sustainability of evidence-based practices. Projects can help to identify best practices that might guide institutional transformation, again, working through a theory of change to affect that particular transformation. Other areas of interest include looking at non-tenure track faculty or instructors, either through policy or professional development at their institutions or communities, and identification of common elements across disciplines, programs, institutions, or systems that might help to support students from underrepresented groups to be successful in STEM. As I mentioned, one of the unique features of projects in this particular track is that they require the inclusion of a theory of change. So the proposals into this track really should describe the theory of change and should include research literature and theoretical perspectives relating to that theory and concerning the change that the projects are hoping to effect. Projects in this track typically recognize STEM higher education as a complex system. And so the projects need to include teams of faculty members and support from department chairs or other administrative levels within an institution's academic leadership that can actually help to support the change that is desired. It can also be helpful to have support from provosts or presidents of universities to ensure that there really is institutional backing for the types of projects that are proposed in this track. Level 1 proposals in this particular track are typically intended for early stage exploratory projects or small to mid-scale projects that build on prior work. Pilot data may be helpful in this track, but is not required, and projects with a strong grounding in the relevant literature are also appropriate for this particular track. A new feature in this track is the capacity building level. So this is a new category of proposals, and this is really geared toward institutions that have not had prior funding through the ICT track. So we're hoping to enable institutions that are interested in undergoing this type of transformative effort to help identify and develop a project. So funding that is received through the capacity building tier could be used for things like assessing institutional needs to help formulate departmental or institutional commitments to the project, to really develop the necessary partnerships, to really gather data on prior institutional efforts and to understand things that have worked and perhaps things that have not in those prior efforts. The capacity building projects can also help investigators to learn about relevant theories of change. Maybe a theory has not yet been identified, but in a capacity building project, the project team can really investigate the theories of change and help to identify those that are relevant to the process that they're trying, or to the transformation that they're trying to effect. Capacity building awards can also help to identify relevant institutional practices and policies and to help formulate plans for advancing the community or the institutional transformation. So this is really a sort of a thought level. It's a time to gather your thoughts and really put things together about how one might actually engage in institutional and community transformation. Within these proposals, proposers are encouraged to include a variety of participants, and that might include things like disciplinary or educational researchers, assessment or evaluation experts or advisors, and institutional leaders that can help to support the idea that the work will be carried out in the manner which it is intended. Funds that are awarded through this particular track are intended to defray costs for things like coordination among project participants, perhaps convening and hosting working meetings for participants, particularly if they're from a number of disparate institutions. Funds can be used for gathering and sharing data that would be used as the basis for a future ICT proposal, and attending relevant meetings, such as the IUSE EHR Principal Investigator Summit that will be held this summer. Capacity building proposals may be submitted by a single institution or as a collaborative project from 2 or more institutions. If a single institution is submitting the project, the maximum award would be $150,000 for a maximum of 2 years. A collaborative project can be awarded for up to $300,000 for a maximum term of 2 years. For institutions that are interested in submitting collaborative projects, I would like to point out that the lead institution should be an institution that has not had prior institutional and community transformation track funding, but the collaborating partners can be institutions that have received prior ICT funding. And so a project like this might allow an institution that is new to this type of work to collaborate with an institution that has undergone prior ICT efforts, and so might be helpful in helping to put together a project for a new institution. And just as a reminder, and again, a quick overview, again, we have our two tracks, Engaged Student Learning and Institutional and Community Transformation. We have a deadline that's coming up very shortly. The next deadline is February 2nd for Level 1 proposals in the Engaged Student Learning track, as well as for capacity building and Level 1 proposals in the Institutional and Community Transformation track. And just a quick overview of our deadlines as a whole. Capacity building and Level 1 proposals have two deadlines a year. This year they are February 2nd, 2021 and August 3rd, 2021. And our solicitation notes that the deadlines are intended to be the first Tuesday in February and the first Tuesday in August. Level 2 and Level 3 proposals will be accepted on December 7th, 2021 this year, and thereafter on the first Tuesday in December. Workshops and conferences are another important piece of the IUSE program. We encourage submission of proposals for workshops and conferences that can address critical challenges in undergraduate STEM education. And these proposals may be submitted at any time. Depending on the size and scale of the planned workshop and conference, the proposals typically would include budgets somewhere between $20,000 to $100,000. A requirement for these types of proposals, however, is a prior consultation with an NSF program officer in the IUSE program. So the consultation is intended to determine the appropriateness of the proposed workshop or conference for the IUSE program, and also to identify a program officer who would be willing to manage the proposal once it is submitted. If you would like to find contact information for program officers affiliated with this program, they are available on our program webpage. And there is a whole list of program officers and their disciplinary expertise. So you can go through and help choose a program officer whose expertise might match the interests of the conference you're trying to propose. Conference and workshop proposals addressing diversity in STEM teaching and learning, and those involving collaborations of researchers and disciplinary scientists to ensure that STEM teaching really does reflect the cutting-edge STEM knowledge that's being accrued are especially encouraged in the IUSE program. Okay, at this point, we're going to break for questions. You have a question window that you can write your questions into, and Dr. Sverdrup and I will do our best to answer a few questions right now. We have several points within this webinar at which you will be able to ask questions. And we have received a lot of questions, so please don't be discouraged if your questions aren't answered. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can in each of these question periods, but again, please understand if your question is not answered, we are simply overwhelmed with the volume of questions. So the first question that comes up is, does a capacity building proposal need an explicit theory of change? And the answer to that really is no. Capacity building proposals can be used to help define the theory of change. I think presenting, some ideas as to what types of change are needed and some possible theories might be helpful, but stating an explicit theory that will actually guide the work is probably not required for a capacity building proposal. I think, again, building an argument that you will identify a theory of change and perhaps identifying a few that might be explored as part of the capacity building process might be helpful, but you really don't need to have an explicit theory of change right from the get-go. Okay, next question is, to what degree does final data need to be analyzed during the period of the capacity building grant? The idea is capacity building data is probably never going to be final data. So this is just a chance to collect data that is already available through the institution and to use that data to help guide defining the project or the problem that would be addressed through a future institutional and community transformation project. So gathering the data is really much more important than analyzing it. But analyzing it to the extent that you can understand what the data tells you is also going to be an important part of writing a capacity building proposal. Next question. For the institutional track, how do you know which level to begin at, or even if you should focus on capacity building first, if it's your very first time applying? That is really up to you and the project that is being defined. In some institutions, a lot of prior work has been done to the level that an institution could even support coming in perhaps at a level 2 type of project for the very first submission. However, if the institution is very new to this type of work and simply wants to gather data and understand exactly what resources are available or how a project might be structured, it might be more appropriate to come in at the capacity building level. Again, thinking about the scale and scope of the project that you envision and the resources that you would need to carry it out can be helpful in defining what the scale or what level you might want to come in at. The other thing you can do is you can contact a program officer in the Division of Undergraduate Education and ask for a consultation, and they might be very helpful in helping you define where exactly within which level your proposal might fit. Next question is, only 4% of funding has historically gone to community colleges. Do you foresee any improvement in that allocation percentage in coming years? What about community colleges collaborating with a four-year college? I would like to point out that that 4% is really only for community colleges that have served as the lead institution on a project. We have a number of projects in the IUSE program in which both four-year and two-year institutions are collaborating. And so the two-year colleges are receiving funding through those awards, either as a collaborating partner or as a sub-awardee. So I think the 4% figure may be a little bit misleading. We make every effort to support community college efforts, and we really are very interested in improving STEM teaching and learning in the community college environment. A number of community colleges don't have much of a prior history of IUSE funding, and so that was actually one of the driving factors for thinking about starting the Dear Colleague letter for the Engaged Student Learning track to encourage institutions that have not had prior Engaged Student Learning funding to think about coming in that particular avenue into the IUSE program. Next question. Can non-for-profits serve as a lead on institutional and community transformation tracks? Yes, there is no restriction on who can serve as the lead on any type of project. If it makes sense for a nonprofit organization to serve as the lead, then by all means, they should be the lead on that particular project. Next question. For the Dear Colleague letter proposal, will it still follow the two tracks that are defined by the RFA? Also, what is the best way to identify if your institution has been funded by the IUSE EHR program before? The Dear Colleague letter is specifically geared to the Engaged Student Learning track. So proposals that are received through that Dear Colleague letter should be addressed to the Engaged Student Learning track. The best way to find out if your institution has been funded, there are actually two ways to do this. The first would be to go talk to your grants office and see if they have, if they can tell you whether you have prior funding through the IUSE program. They should be tracking all grants that your institution has received, so they should have that information. The other way to do it is to go to our award search database. And there is an award search database that's available on the National Science Foundation homepage. If you use the advanced search feature, you can actually search by institution and see if any institutions have received funding. You can also search by program, and the trick to searching for proposals that have been funded through the IUSE program is to use the program code 1998. So if you use that program code and search for your institution, you'll be able to see whether any awards have been made from the IUSE program to your institution. Next question. I want to confirm that the IUSE proposal allows for project evaluation to be conducted by members of the project team and advisory board and does not require an external evaluator. The evaluation and assessment should be conducted in the way that's best suited to the project itself. In some cases, this can be through using an advisory board. In other cases, it might be more beneficial to have an external evaluator. So it's really up to the project team to determine what type of evaluation is best and to use that strategy to help them in their project. I'm going to read one more question, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Sverdrup, and he'll tell you a little bit more about the program expectations and what the review process will be for proposals that are received in the program. The question I'm going to answer is, can an institution apply to more than one level? For example, to capacity building and to level 1. An institution is not limited to applying to more than one level or even to submitting more than one proposal per competition. The only restriction we have is that a single individual can serve on no more than 3, or can serve as a principal investigator or a co-principal investigator on no more than 3 proposals in a given year. And for us, we define a year as relating to our fiscal year, so that's October 1st through September 30th. The institution can, of course, apply to as many different levels as makes sense for that particular institution and the investigators within that institution. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith, who can talk a little bit about program expectations.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I appreciate it. In this next part of the webinar, we'll be talking specifically about program expectations. The EHR IUSE program has 3 distinct goals, and projects that are submitted to the program can address any one or multiple of these goals. The first goal is to build knowledge about STEM teaching and learning at the undergraduate level. And projects that do this often develop novel, new, creative, or transformative approaches to undergraduate STEM teaching and learning. The second goal is to incorporate evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning for all undergraduates. And projects that do this often adapt, improve, replicate, and can include evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning. The third goal is to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education. This typically happens in the ICT projects, and projects that address this goal typically lay the groundwork for sustained departmental, institutional, or community transformation and improvement. The IUSE program is particularly interested in gaining new knowledge. Each project should produce new knowledge. We expect that, but projects can do it in different ways. They may do it by posing one or more research questions that are addressed in the project, or they may do it through the evaluation of project activities, the impact that the project has had, or project outcomes. Successful IUSE proposals often will build on what is already known. Successful proposals will typically summarize the published literature in the field. And in so doing, they will be able to define a starting point for the work that is described in the proposal. Successful proposals also should include a well-designed plan to gather data and specify the methods of analysis that will be used in looking at that data and answering the questions that are posed. Projects should also include mechanisms to evaluate the success of the project, and this evaluation should be both formative during the course of the project and summative at the end of the project. It's not at all unusual for us to find that successful formative evaluation leads to changes in the project. And this is something that is perfectly acceptable if, in the end, that improves the project's success. Successful proposals should also explain how findings and materials of the project will be shared outside of the project, typically beyond the institution, possibly regionally or nationally. Successful proposals should also address the sustainability of project efforts. NSF hopes that these projects will be able to continue their work and continue their impact beyond the period of time that the federal funding is provided. And finally, successful proposals should collaborate as needed with other investigators, institutions, or communities, depending upon the nature of the project, the expected outcomes, and oftentimes the scope and scale of the project. A word about methods of analysis. It's important to align any research or evaluation methods that you describe in the proposal with the questions that are posed. Careful selection of appropriate methods is very important, and there are a variety of methods that can be used. They may be qualitative, they may be quantitative, they can be a mixture of both. It really depends upon the nature of the project and the best methods to address the project goals. So let's have a quick IUSE fact check. True or false? Question number 1. All proposals must have a research component. True or false? Well, this is false. However, all proposals must generate new knowledge. Question 2. STEM curriculum development, programmatic pathways, learning resources, assessment instruments, and faculty development all may receive funding. True or false? This is true. All of those different aspects of the improvement of undergraduate STEM education can be integral parts of projects and are certainly eligible for funding in the IUSE program. Question 3, proposals may focus on both STEM and non-STEM majors. That is absolutely true. Efforts to improve undergraduate STEM education for either group is perfectly appropriate. Remember, we are interested in improving STEM education, and undergraduate students of all majors typically take some STEM courses, even if they are not STEM majors. Question number 4. Proposals may focus solely on students in a single discipline. This is also true. Proposals can focus on a single discipline. They can also be multidisciplinary. They can be interdisciplinary. Remember, the bottom line here is that we are trying to support projects that will improve STEM education at large. So it doesn't really make any difference if it's a single discipline, multiple disciplines, whatever the case may be. Question 5. An evaluation plan that provides formative and summative assessment of the effectiveness of the project in achieving its goals is required. The answer to that one is yes. That is a true statement. We do expect that to be present in the proposal. Question 6. Proposals should demonstrate a solid grounding in relevant literature on STEM teaching and learning. That is also true. Remember, we want you to build on what is already known. We want you to build on what previous IUSE projects and the investment of federal dollars to support them have already demonstrated. And if you can build on that, you can identify then where your project will either add to the knowledge or improve on the knowledge and continue to move undergraduate STEM education forward. And question number 7, only colleges and universities may submit proposals. Well, that's false, as you know. We've already covered that. Professional societies, companies, nonprofit organizations, all of these are eligible to submit proposals to the IUSE program. Here's a multiple choice one. This is our last fact check. See if you can get this right. Which of the following may receive IUSE funding? Well, let's see. Using and building evidence about improving STEM instructional practices. Is that an idea that can be supported in IUSE? The investigation of novel instructional tools or learning systems, including cyber learning. A project that would create, implement, and test program, curricular, course, and technology-driven models. Would that qualify? Developing, implementing, and testing creative approaches for the adoption of education research into disciplinary teaching. Developing and validating assessments or metrics for undergraduate STEM learning and instructional practice. And the last option is to propagate and sustain transformative and effective STEM teaching and learning through institutional practices or the involvement of professional societies. So 6 different options. Which of those could potentially receive funding? Well, the correct answer is all of the above. IUSE is a program which tries not to be too prescriptive. We are interested in your ideas. We are interested in your originality and the things that you would like to try to accomplish. In large part, the flexibility that has been built into the IUSE solicitation, the IUSE program, is very much intentional. So we look to you, in part, to come up with best ideas for how to improve undergraduate STEM education. Well, let's stop there for this section and see if there are any questions. And I'm going to look over here at the question box and I'll try to answer as many as I can. I'll also ask Ellen to jump in if she has anything to add. So the first question is it feasible to develop a program to increase students' interest to complete an accelerated master's, or is that out of the scope of this program? Okay, the IUSE program really is intended to focus specifically on undergraduate education. So that should be the principal focus of any project that is funded.
And master's students would be out of the realm of our purview and our mission.
Right. This is kind of a related question. Is collaboration with K-12 high schools being encouraged or discouraged under IUSE projects? As an example, developing course materials for college course and similar modules for high schools? Well, again, I'll say the IUSE program, since it is run through the Division of Undergraduate Education, focuses specifically on undergraduate education. Now, having said that, there are examples of IUSE programs that do incorporate some work at the high school level, typically not earlier than high school. But for instance, there are high schools that have dual enrollment programs with community colleges, sometimes with local universities. Other projects may have programs that are essentially bridge programs over the summer between high school and entry into the university. So there certainly are projects that have elements of that, but I want to stress that the main focus of the project should be on undergraduate education. Let's see. Can a funding proposal be applied in collaboration with colleagues outside of the United States? That's a great question. The National Science Foundation, generally speaking, has a policy that only U.S. institutions of higher education would be supported through the IUSE program. Now, that's not to say that an IUSE project couldn't involve international activity. If United States students were to do some of their work abroad, and if you could document that there was a compelling reason for them to do the work abroad as opposed to in the United States, then those students could be supported. But imagine a case where an institution of higher education in the United States wanted to partner with one in, let's say, a foreign country. It doesn't make any difference what foreign country it is. That project could be funded through IUSE, but it would be the United States portion of the project that was funded. The portion of the project that was related to a different country, it would be expected that that country would fund that portion of the project. So we do not preclude collaboration, but we do divide out the finances. Okay. I understand that NSF funds social and behavioral research. Are these disciplines included in STEM education in this program? Yes, they would be.
Yeah, the IUSE program can fund STEM education relating to any of the fields that are supported by the National Science Foundation.
Right. There are. It was a very good question, though, because the Division of Undergraduate Education does have some programs that are congressionally mandated to focus on a smaller subset of disciplines supported by NSF. IUSE is not one of them, as Ellen mentioned. So for IUSE, yes, it's not a problem. Okay. Let's see. If we are aware of an existing NSF IUSE funded program that we would like to try to replicate at our home institution, what's the right way to go about that? Well, remember that every IUSE project is expected to generate new knowledge. Now, in order to have a firm grasp of what that new knowledge is, you clearly have to know what the existing knowledge base is. So that's where we say that every project should be based on a foundation of the current literature, the current state of knowledge of what is happening in that field. If you are aware of a successful method or technique that is being used at another institution, and you would like to incorporate it at your institution, then a exact carbon copy replication would not be appropriate. But you might replicate and modify that existing project to fit your particular institution, your particular students, your particular environment. So it's perfectly all right. In fact, I would say it would be encouraged to look at what is being done out there in the community, to look at it, find something that you think could benefit undergraduate education at your institution with appropriate modifications and changes, and then use those changes, use those modifications to generate the new knowledge that could then be used to help the rest of the community. Okay, I'm going to answer one more, and then I think we might need to go on. Let's see. On a resubmitted grant, is it possible to have prior reviewers review the resubmission? This is an interesting question, and I don't know if you're asking because you hope it's true or because you hope it's not true. The fact of the matter is that it is possible. It is never intentional if it happens. It is possible. I think that it's more unlikely than likely, frankly. When we receive proposals, one of the first things we do is sort them so that we can panel them appropriately. And the sorting places them in different, we'll call them bins. Just as a simple example, a very simple example, we typically sort proposals into disciplinary bins, for instance. Those aren't the only ones, but if you have chemistry proposals, you like to keep them together. If you have geoscience proposals, you like to keep them together. Once they're sorted into panels, we then look for reviewers. Now, we might have 5 panels of chemistry proposals, and so we will need to find many reviewers. If you resubmitted a chemistry proposal, is it possible that a reviewer that saw it before would happen to be on a chemistry panel the next time around? Yes, it's possible, but we try to change the makeup of the reviewers we have on panels. We like to bring in new reviewers. We like to bring in experienced reviewers. So I guess the short answer is yes, it's possible, but it's probably less likely. Okay, let's continue then and talk a little bit about the NSF merit review criteria. NSF has a governing board. It's called the National Science Board. It consists of very distinguished STEM professionals from around the country. And the National Science Board has decreed that there will be 2 merit review criteria. One of these is intellectual merit, and the other is broader impacts. And what is particularly important about the fact that the National Science Board has done this is that they have stated officially that these 2 merit review criteria should be weighed equally in reviewing proposals. So intellectual merit doesn't account for 70% and broader impacts 30, or vice versa. They are to be weighted equally. Let's take a look first at intellectual merit. Intellectual merit basically asks the question, what is the potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across fields? One way we can summarize that statement is by simply saying, what will we learn from the work? The second criterion, broader impacts. What is the potential for benefiting society or advancing desired societal outcomes? We can summarize that by simply asking, why is the work important to society? So let's unpack the first of these, intellectual merit, a little bit. Intellectual merit can consist of many different things, and it can be defined really in many different ways. Certainly, it addresses the potential to advance knowledge. Will this project advance knowledge? Will it change our understanding of undergraduate STEM education within the field that it is trying to address, or for that matter, across multiple fields? A second aspect of this is evaluating the PI and the co-PI's capability in conducting the development and knowledge generation associated with the project. What experience does the project team have? Have they worked in this area before? Do they have the relevant background and knowledge to be able to successfully carry out the project? Does the team have access to the necessary resources that would be needed to conduct the project? These resources may be material, they may be intellectual, they can include unfunded collaborations that are necessary to conduct the work. Does the proposal include a clear plan for what the project will do? The project can have a great idea, but if you don't have a plan for addressing that idea, the intellectual merit will be significantly weakened. Who is going to conduct the work? What is the role and responsibility of each individual in the team? What is the timeline for the work? Is the timeline reasonable? And why? Why is this project important? And finally, intellectual merit includes the mechanism for assessing the success of the project's attempts to advance knowledge. There needs to be an evaluation component to be able to accurately determine whether or not the project is on course, if it's proceeding as planned, and whether or not the results really are meaningful. Broader impacts. Well, broader impact really is a measure of the societal impact that is likely as a result of the project. And broader impacts really include many different characteristics. Certainly full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM is a critical component of the potential broader impact of a project. Improving STEM education and educator development is a clear broader impact that could come out of a project. Broader impacts might also be increasing public scientific literacy and public engagement with science and technology, citizen science, for instance, or improving the well-being of individuals in society. Development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce is an overarching goal of the National Science Foundation and certainly a potential broader impact of IUSE projects. IUSE projects, particularly in the ICT arm, can increase partnerships between academia, industry, and other organizations, nonprofits, professional societies, improving national security, increasing the economic competitiveness of the United States, and enhancing the infrastructure for research and education. Now, obviously, every project doesn't have to address every one of these broader impacts. These are simply examples of broader impacts, and they aren't meant to be exhaustive, but really successful projects will address one or more of these in some fashion. There are other review considerations as well, in addition to these two fundamental merit review criteria. And other questions that reviewers can ask and program officers can ask is, to what extent do the activities that you propose in your proposal suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts? Is the plan for carrying out the proposed activities well-reasoned, organized, and based on a sound rationale? And does the plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success? How qualified is the individual PI, co-PIs, team, or institution to conduct the proposed activities? And are there adequate resources available for the principal investigator, either at their home institution or through collaborations to carry out these activities? I should say that when we invite reviewers to review, we also tell them that they are free to look at other sections of the proposal than simply the narrative. They're asked to review the facilities, equipment, and other resources section. They're also asked to provide us with their best judgment as to how strong the data management plan is. If there is any involvement of postdoctoral researchers, there must be a postdoctoral researcher mentoring plan, and any and all required supplementary documents. So reviewers are asked basically to look over the entire proposal, and it's very important to make sure that all of the required components of the proposal are present. So we can ask the question, is it intellectual merit or broader impacts? We're going to give a couple of examples here, and we'll ask you to decide if you think that this example is an example of intellectual merit or broader impact. So the first one is a statement that we might find in a proposal that says, in addition to development and implementation of a novel curriculum, the project will include educational research to uncover new information about undergraduate model-based reasoning through detailed assessment of classroom learning. I'm sorry, I forgot to advance to show you that question. So there's the question. Is this an example of intellectual merit, or is it an example of broader impact? I'll give you just a second to think about that. Okay, well, this would be a very good example of intellectual merit in a project. So this is a project that's going to include educational research to yield new information. There will also be a detailed assessment of classroom learning during this project. These are all great examples of intellectual merit. Second one, activities planned will provide in-depth faculty development through a national series of workshops and an expansion of an ongoing national study of the effectiveness of this approach for learning about the nature of science. Is this intellectual merit or is this broader impact? Well, this would be a good example of broader impact. The broader impact here is evident in the intent to have a national series of workshops that will assist in faculty development and will also produce an expansion of an ongoing national study. So I'll ask again if there are any questions at this point, and I'll go and see if I can answer some here. Let's see. Is there a guide for what to include in the narrative/proposal to be submitted? How do we know what elements to address? This is a very good question, and I think the best answer I have is that the official guide to what we would hope would be included in the narrative or the proposal is the program solicitation. The program solicitation is very detailed. Some might think it's a little bit too detailed, but when you read it, I think you'll discover that it's a mix of specific things that must be included, suggestions for how you can craft the proposal to fit the project, and also a fair amount of freedom, as I said before, for you to be creative and tell us what you want your project to be. Very typically, when potential PIs call program officers and say, can we discuss an idea with you? The program officer will try to set up a time when they can communicate, and it provides you with an opportunity to kind of bounce your idea off the program officer. But before you do that, the very first thing you should do is read the program solicitation in detail. It's very important and should give you all of the information that you need. Another question, does IUSE use ad hoc review or panel review or a combination of both? In IUSE's history, we have used both, but the vast majority of the review that occurs in IUSE is panel review. Now, having said that, we occasionally will get a proposal that has a project described that requires a very, very specific knowledge base that we may not have in the cadre of reviewers that we've put together for that panel. The reviewers may be able to address, let's say, 75% of what's in that proposal, but there may be 25% that is so specific and so detailed that we are going to want to seek additional advice from experts in that area. And in that case, we may have a combined panel review and also request ad hoc reviews from the community. As a general rule, though, the vast majority of IUSE proposals will be panel reviewed. Question, can IUSE funds be used to purchase major equipment in STEM programs? If so, what percentage of the allocated funds? Well, this is an interesting question. I mean, I will say technically, yes, IUSE funds can be used to purchase major equipment. The solicitation doesn't specifically prohibit that. Having said that, though, the IUSE program does not specifically call out projects that would request major equipment. So oftentimes, particularly strong and successful proposals that would require new pieces of major equipment would have to make a very strong case for the reason why that institution was well situated to conduct the project. It's not unusual for projects to say that they need the use of a major piece of equipment, but then you will find in the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal a statement to the effect that the institution has that piece of equipment. And so it makes sense for the project then to have to rely on it. So it's not prohibited, but you would have to make a strong case for the appropriateness of that. Let's see. I would like to participate in grant review for IUSE and have been encouraged to do so previously by a National Science Foundation program officer. I've applied a couple of times in the last couple of years, including responding to a recent call in November 2020, but have not heard back. What could I do to be more successful? Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you for your interest. I want to thank you for your persistence. I don't want you to be discouraged. So what I'm going to suggest is that you send either me or Ellen a follow-up email and give us your contact information and remind us that you are particularly interested. My email is sverdru@nsf.gov, but you'll be able to find that on the solicitation as well. I think a word to all of you who are listening, if you are interested in being a reviewer for IUSE, please do let us know. You can let us know far in advance. You can let us know closer to when we put panels together. I think, to be perfectly honest with you, it's sometimes a little bit easier if you let us know, let's say 8 weeks or so. Well, how should I say this? Maybe 8 weeks prior to the submission deadline for proposals. Because, well, 4 to 8 weeks, because that's when some program officers start thinking about, well, it's going to be time soon to put together panels again, so I'm going to have to start thinking about reviewers. And if you're in that mode and you have recently been contacted, it's probably a little more likely that you'll reach out to that person. But please don't get discouraged. Please let us know. We really appreciate it.
I also wanted to jump in here and just say that we do have a reviewer interest survey. The link for that is posted on the IUSE homepage. So if you are interested in serving as a reviewer, please make sure that you've completed the information on that reviewer survey so we have some better idea of what your expertise and area of interests are and can better match you to potential panels.
Thank you very much, Ellen. That's an excellent point. Here's another question. I mentioned building on past IU's results. Is there a good place to find papers or presentations that were funded by NSF IUs? Well, there are a couple of suggestions that I'd like to make here. One is the fact that Ellen previously mentioned that NSF does have a search function for prior projects. It's a fairly sophisticated tool. You can do simple searches, you can do detailed searches. As Ellen mentioned, if you do a detailed search and use the program element code 1998, 1998, that's the program element code for the IUSE program. And you should be able to pull up funded projects. You can narrow that search with keywords. If you're interested specifically in chemistry, for instance, you can include a keyword chemistry. But the NSF search tool is one that many people are not aware of, but it's actually a very handy tool. The other thing I'd suggest is looking at your professional society's education journals. Most professional societies will have a journal that tends to focus on STEM education. And I would suggest looking through those journals, looking at articles that may address issues that you're particularly interested in. When NSF funds a project, the expectation is that publications that come out of that funding will acknowledge the funding by NSF. It may not get down to the level of was funded by the IUSE program, but if it's in an education journal and it's STEM education and it says funded by NSF, there is a pretty good chance that it was IUSE. So I would suggest that. And also many professional societies now at their annual meetings will have special sessions for education abstracts and presentations. And I would suggest if you have an opportunity, go to your professional societies meetings and seek out the education-related sessions or poster sessions and talk with people if you can. Those are all good ways. Let's see. How is the number of students impacted, weighted, or entered in the review process? I assume that is part of review of the broader impact. Yes, you could say that one measure of broader impact is the number of students who will be impacted. It's important to keep in mind, though, that any individual project will impact a certain number of students directly and potentially another number of students indirectly. Broader impact deals or would focus on not only the direct number, but also would consider the indirect number. If your project happened to impact, let's say, 100 students at your university in a single course, but you could demonstrate that that course is a course that is taught in institutions of higher education across the country. And if you developed new knowledge about how that course could be improved in terms of the student learning gains, because of some unique aspect of how you taught it or modified it, then the potential impact could be very large, and that would be significant broader impact. I think it's reasonable too to, in the back of your mind, understand that the number of students impacted, if the project focuses on students, you know, the project could focus on faculty development, but if it focuses on students, the number of students impacted should have some reasonable tie with the budget. You would not necessarily think that a $2 million project impacting 30 students in one course would be the strongest case that you could make, for instance. So my advice would be design the project the way you want it to be. Write it up that way. Think about the direct impact, the potential indirect impact. If you can make a case for what the potential indirect impact is, make that case, and all of that will be factored into broader impacts. What percentage of IUSE grant applications tend to get funded? How many applications do you tend to receive? I'm going to ask Ellen if you could please answer that, because I think you're a little bit closer to the data than I am on that one.
Well, the answer is all of the good ones get funded. We do receive a large number of proposals. As you note, we have 3 deadlines during the year. So we get a large number of proposals that come in for each of those deadlines, and we do our best to review them as rapidly as we can. We try to render a decision within about 6 months, but the answer that we would like to give is that all of the worthy proposals will be funded. I think we're drawing near the end of our time, so maybe we should go back to the slides and just cover a couple more things over here.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you then, Ellen. Thank you.
Okay. We have a couple of resources that are available to you. There are some that I have mentioned that will be posted through the resources tab of this presentation, and that includes, again, a copy of the slides that we used today, a copy of the program solicitation, a link to the AAAS IUSE toolkit where you can find additional tools about proposal preparation, as well as archived prior webinars, and a survey for those of you who participated in today's webinar. We'd really appreciate your opinion on the information that was passed in this webinar to you. Within the National Science Foundation, we have the Policies and Procedures Guide. Actually, I think we skipped, there's one. We actually have the published web page for the IUSE program is up on the National Science Foundation page. You can find it simply by Googling NSF IUSE. That will take you right there. We are operating under a program solicitation in effect right now, NSF 19-601. And as Keith mentioned and I mentioned, we have an award search database that you can go back and look for things that were funded by the IUSE program, and that's available at www.nsf.gov/award search. The webpage also gives you the contact names for program officers that are affiliated with the IUSE program, and it's broken down by the disciplinary expertise that each program officer displays. So you can find somebody who relates to the type of project or the type of discipline or the area in which you'd like to work and contact that person directly. They're probably in the best position to help provide you with advice and guidance on your particular project. The National Science Foundation also has a number of other pieces of information available to you. There is the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, PAPG for short, to those of us who visit it frequently. But this is the blueprint for writing and preparing a proposal. It contains all of the information about what's allowed, what's not allowed, how to structure your proposal, budgetary information, all of that kind of thing. There is another document called the Common Guidelines for Education Research and Development. For those of you that are somewhat new to education-type projects, this might provide some helpful information on how these projects can be structured, the need for evaluation, and things like that. We have a couple of things that can help you understand what the merit review process is like, so you can understand what your grant would be going through or your proposal would be going through once it reaches the NSF. There is a website that contains a merit review overview that contains a number of pieces of information about merit review, including NSF's formal definition for the merit review criteria. There is also a video available on that website called The Art and Science of Reviewing Proposals. And this is a video that we ask all reviewers to look at. So it provides information to help them structure their reviews. So I think by looking at that video, you can gather an idea of the kinds of things that reviewers are looking for in a proposal. And hopefully you can be able to address those as you prepare your own proposals. I also want to point out that there is a related solicitation in another program in the Education and Human Resources Directorate, and that is the Building Capacity in STEM Education Research, or the BICSR program. This is actually a program that allows investigators or individuals with an interest in STEM education to actually gain some knowledge and some experience and some training in that type of research. So you can apply for an award through the BICSR program that would allow you to gain that experience in performing educational research. I do want to thank you for your participation in today's webinar and, of course, for your interest in improving undergraduate STEM education. Without all of you interested and hoping to improve STEM teaching and learning at your institutions, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs at NSF. So we're very happy to have you participate in this webinar. We hope that we've provided useful information, and we do very much look forward to receiving ideas and proposals from you in the future. Since it is 4:30, we actually do not have time to go into the slides on proposal preparation and submission. But as I mentioned, those slides have been covered in prior webinars. So if you visit the AAAS website, you can find a webinar in which those slides are covered, and that will provide you some additional information on the required components for a proposal and the things that you should think about including and things that might be helpful as you think about preparing and writing up your ideas. Again, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Keith and I are very happy to be here, and we, along with all other program officers at the Division of Undergraduate Education and the IUSE program, look very much to hearing from you and hearing about your ideas in the future.